Me beard brush. It's me beard brush.
I thought we had a Pringle for a second. He was about to eat a Pringle.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Data. In this episode, we'll tackle the huge subject of IT security, a subject that can be fairly overwhelming. So what we did was to invite two experts to help us understand what's the most important and the most essential parts of security for a company today. We talk about the attacks of the future, considering AI being on the rise and stuff like that. But we also try to figure out what makes a security consultant smile, because they don't too much nowadays, I guess. With me today talking about these topics are Tim Simons, product manager for IT security here at Proact with over 20 years of experience within cybersecurity. And Neil Richardson, who's the technical director at Samurai Digital Security. He's a co-founder and runs the SteelCon Hacker Conference. And he's also a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University, where he's been teaching cybersecurity for over 10 years. So these guys really know what they're talking about. I hope you'll learn something from this episode and that you'll enjoy the show.
All right, security. That's such a super broad topic. I mean, there's a lot of shows, podcast articles, TV shows, radio shows, and they all talk about different aspects of security and the risks around it. And honestly, I didn't know how to start this episode off, so I'll actually hand it over to you with the question: what is the thing that you are talking to customers about right now that is on their top 5 topics, the top 5 fears, top 5 solutions to their fears, and so on. I'll start off with you, Tim. What do you say about that?
Okay, so I guess there's a lot more than 5 of them. If we focus on 5 areas where we typically focus on to start with, I think certainly the staff awareness side of things, what's the culture and the business look like from a security point of view? What's the staff training like? What's the awareness within the organization? Email phishing is definitely up there. That's on our list of top 5. That's the thing that we tend to see most cyber attacks sort of start with email. So we focus a lot on that. We talk about visibility across your infrastructure, the ability to sort of understand what you expect to see, what's normal, what's not normal. We focus a lot on backup as well, the ability to recover should you have cybersecurity incidents. How many is that? 4? No, I need a 5th one. So why don't you give me a 5th one, Neil? I mean, I guess there's a lot of different things we can go out and talk about, right? So it's not like there's 5 areas specifically that we're going to cover, but as I say, the awareness, which is visibility, staff awareness within the organization, recognizing to the business that it is actually a problem, that it is a threat. That's very much educational. Mm-hmm. Focusing on phishing, focusing on configuration, focusing on visibility, focusing on the ability to recover as well as an organization. Sort of, how do you recover if you do have an incident, which is in the modern world is quite realistic that you will, regardless of what controls you put in place. So they're typically where the conversations come from. I mean, most of my engagements are with customers that are sort of trying to address not really having much in place in the first instance. So they're sort of coming to us and saying, look, we've invested over the years, we've bought these technologies, we've bought these firewalls, we've bought these endpoint controls, we've bought these application firewalls, but they don't really have any sort of structure or strategy around how they manage that stuff as an organization. They're just point controls. So it's about bringing that stuff together and looking at how to actually put a strategy across how you manage these platforms and the intelligence they provide.
That sounds very, there's a lot of different parts in what you just said. And I have some questions.
More than 5,
but
right?
Neil, but we'll go over to Neil. Same question to you. What do you talk about with your customers right now? What's the hot topics within security?
I mean, Tim's got in there straight away with a lot of the good ones, to be honest. A lot of the things that we see mirror what Tim said. I think in addition to those, one of the challenges that we've seen is systems and companies that have been built up over years, yeah? So a company that maybe existed 20 years ago, they've got an IT footprint that over many, many years, and that IT footprint has been built up. I always say like a hospital, yeah? You ever see a hospital, yeah? Hospitals have been around for many, many years. and Victorian times all the way to modern times. And you walk around a hospital, there's all these different pieces, there's all these different rooms and buildings all plumbed together with heating systems and everything, and it works, but it wasn't designed from the scratch. And a lot of companies right now are facing that challenge of, I think there's talk about a tech a deficit, and that affects security, because what happens is, you've got all these legacy systems or things that have been built upon, and it really, really makes it difficult to secure them, because you lose people that understand those technologies. And also a lot of IT sort of teams are really stretched on time anyway, especially with the pandemic of getting things accessed remotely and stuff like that. So what's happened is a mixture of that plus the pandemic causing this remote working has forced companies to adapt faster than they probably would have liked to move to cloud platforms to enable remote working, whilst they're sat on a tech deficit, and not just a tech deficit, but also kind of even newer companies, that weren't geared up to work remotely. They're just having to make things work as quickly as possible. I think in March, you couldn't buy a laptop for £2,000. The whole channel sold out of laptops. And so people were dusting off their personal laptops and bringing those in. So I guess the only thing I could really add to what Tim said is like lack of planning. Who would know this was going to happen? Nobody. But a lack of being able to move quickly into remote working, which is a project I think a lot of companies would have spent maybe a few years working towards. So that, for me, has been one of the biggest challenges. And what we have seen in the last particularly 3 months is where companies are starting to get hit now, because they got up and running, which had to happen. But now the malicious actors, the entities, they're targeting them. They're targeting these users. They're targeting these systems. And there's a lot of IT teams out there, fighting the good fight and really struggling to keep up with them, because you're fighting against an adversary that's basically been preparing for the last however many years. And they're coming at you when you're, in a sort of bit of a disarray, just trying to keep your company working. So really that's been a big difference this year for me and from what we've seen, to be honest.
Cool, very interesting.
I think this year's brought a lot of challenges to organizations, right? Around, if we look at COVID-19 and what that's caused businesses to do, they've had to restructure how they effectively consume their IT platforms. And most of that has been, as Neil said, sending people equipment, setting it up very quickly and getting people operational and working, because in reality, security is kind of there as a concern for businesses, but the bigger concern is, can they continue to be operational? So you've got to get people online, you've got to get people operating and working, and that leaves businesses vulnerable. And I think it's very true that from the point of view of the attackers, they've kind of got all this time and where areas to look at, and they recognize where these vulnerabilities are. They recognize it's going to be easier to social engineer people. They recognize businesses have had to really, really quickly adopt controls and mechanisms to get people working remotely without fully understanding what they're doing in many cases. So that's been a real challenge for organizations this year. And obviously with that, we have seen an uptick in activity that's sort of related to COVID-19, but also benefiting from the COVID-19 situation. So related, I mean, phishing emails that are COVID-19 related, DNS domains, the sort of stuff where you're trying to get people to click on that email link because they're in a sort of a state of anxiety. But also COVID-19 is making people perhaps not think through as quickly what they would previously do. And they're not sat next to their colleagues in the office, so they can't go and ask questions. They're a little bit detracted, if you like, from the normal support operations when they're in business. It's not unusual to walk up to the IT support team and say, look, I've had this come up, what should I do about it? People don't have that when they're in isolation. So yeah, it's brought a lot of challenges, social challenges certainly in IT security. And I think that we are seeing organizations, more sophisticated ones in particular, profit off that.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to also attack an organization, right? I mean, I guess you said just the word social got me thinking of social engineering, which I don't know how common that is, but I mean that must be very common, and that must be even easier now when you're not actually seeing your colleagues for physically.
That's right.
And just claiming to be someone new at the company, social engineering your way into the the gold mine.
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about the information that's out there today, right, it's publicly available. I mean, I trained a new guy who started in our organization today, and the example I gave him is, look, I can go on LinkedIn and I can see that you're happy to start here, you've posted about it, you've got a new job, that's fantastic. But that also tells me that you're not familiar with our process. Okay, so I now know that you're probably a good person for me to send that, hi, it's Jack from the IT support department and I need you to fill these details in, or I've messed your account up, I'm going to migrate you. I need you to give me your credentials, or people fall for this kind of stuff, right? So he's new in the organization, but the world knows he's new because that information's out there in the public domain. So yeah, there's lots of different avenues into who to target in an organization and why. And I think sometimes people don't recognize the reconnaissance that goes on before an attack. There's quite a lot of effort that goes into working out who's your most likely candidate to get your foot into that organization, who's going to click that email, who's going to respond to that email, who's going to receive that phone call and give that information away. Social engineering is fundamentally, I think, part of pretty much every cybercrime that happens today. There is an element of social engineering in there. And it's about obtaining trust over a long period of time. So probably one of the world's greatest social engineers, a hacker called Kevin Mitnick, very famous in the sort of the 1990s. He talks about it from the point of view of establishing trust, right? So you send somebody a communication, they respond. You don't want to do anything right now, but you're building a rapport with this person. And you're building up to a situation where you can ask them to do something. And that's the whole point of social engineering. That exercise can take an hour, it can take months. But if the end game is worth the effort, then people will put that effort in to getting that.
Yeah, and I guess at its core, it's about the term that we use all the time, data being the new gold, kind of. That is what they are after, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're after the data.
It's worth it because they're either going to sell it to somebody else, okay, or they're going to stop you from accessing it, and then charge you, extortion in order to get it back. So that's typically what you see. They're the two things where data is relevant. Or in many cases now they actually do both. They take it and then they encrypt it afterwards. So,
do all organizations have valuable data to attackers? I mean, how do you put the value on different data from such a perspective?
I think the question to ask is, how much is it worth to you? Your data is nothing. It's not worth anything to me. I mean, I'd love to see your holiday photos, right, and your MP3 collection. But the reality is, to me, it's not worth anything, right? But if I take it away from you, it's got to worth. So you'll pay to get it back. And this is sort of what drives where we are today with ransomware, is that it doesn't matter what it's worth to the attackers. It's worth something to you, because without it, you can't operate. If it happens to be worth something on the black market too, then that's beneficial to them. But it doesn't have to be worth anything to anybody else.
Okay, cool. So as an IT manager, let's say, I guess there are a lot of companies out there that they have some basic security functionality, maybe legacy stuff. What are the essentials for any organization really to look over or implement? I guess like in every type of theme, there are, we are geared up to our teeth with, like, we build the wall kind of. And there are the normal ones that have the basic implementation. Kind of, what are the most essential parts to think of as an IT manager?
The most essential stuff. I mean, we actually have sort of in the UK, we have something called Cyber Essentials, right? This is a government list of these are the basic things you should be doing, and what it really covers, antivirus. I think think about what you would do to protect your home PC, right? You install antivirus on it. That's a given. Okay, you control access to it. You may not, your children might use it, relatives, but you don't want somebody, if you're on a train and you leave your iPad and go to the bathroom, you lock it, right? Because you're controlling access, so that's part of it. You want some kind of firewall. You're connecting this device to the internet, so you need some protection between you and the outside world.
Right.
You need to have some, it's a good idea to have some idea of what you've actually got. Asset inventory, what do we own as a business? The number of times we go into organizations and we start to talk to them and they don't actually know what they have or where it is. So how can you protect something? If you don't classify your data and you don't know where you store it, then how are we supposed to put protective controls in front of it? So that's
which connects to our last episode about data locality, which is very interesting that you're mentioning that.
Yeah, that's right.
Know where your
guys
valuables are.
Start with classification. That was the first thing that they said, right? That's the first thing you need to understand before you can start, working out whether you need that data or not. How do you, do you have classification policies in place? So they're kind of they're the fundamentals for me. And the other one is patching. Okay, we know that part of the issue we have is the software development lifecycle. Companies release software, and then they put it out there into the marketplace, and they wait for it to break or people to. There's a whole thing called bug bounties where people make a living off trying to find holes and problems with software, right? So that means that you're always perpetually updating something, because if hacker A finds out on Monday that your software has got a vulnerability, you're kind of hoping that the vendor will learn this and then they'll give you a patch to fix it. But you've got to be applying this stuff. And that's another challenge, is patching's disruptive. So many businesses just don't do it. So, patching, antivirus, firewall, some knowledge of what you've actually got. I think that's particularly useful. And I touched on this earlier as well, is the whole awareness thing. I think security is a culture now that needs to be driven through the organization. It used to be, well, we got some guys who work in IT. That's their problem. They go and procure the software. They make sure everything's fine. But actually, they can't do much about people in the business being susceptible to social engineering, some of which is way outside of the IT department's remit. Just someone ringing up and saying, "Hi, I'm from company X. Can you reroute that order for me, or can you send us over this PO?" So I think it's a cultural thing that has to come from the business top down in order for it to be effective. And we are starting to see that happen a lot more now. I think the world is waking up to this stuff. So there's a lot more recognition in a business that, yes, okay, you're just somebody who does this role, but you could be used as the leverage point into that organization.
Right. Do you have anything to add to that, Neil?
Just on top of that, the other thing that we've seen a lot of in the wild is to do with passwords, right? I don't know, passwords have been around for a very long time, and even the poor chap who came up with the rules for passwords apologised, hasn't he, when he said, an uppercase, a lowercase, a special character, and all that stuff's changed over the years, but for many years people have been drilled with that. But what we have seen is lots of companies that have been affected, the breach, either the initial breach or something that enabled the breach to progress, related to a weak password, and that could be in many different scenarios. So one scenario we've seen is where a company were breached in 2017, right? Attackers got in, they didn't make much of they didn't make many gains. They got in, but then they were kicked out. But what they did manage to get was some usernames and some passwords, and they were kicked out. And then 3 years later, they came back. Obviously, the passwords had been changed, but the usernames were used as a targeted attack. And because one of those usernames had a weak password associated with it that was available on the internet, they managed to get in and get a foothold again. So there's two things there, actually. A previous breach, causing an event in the future, and a weak password, which, again, when we dug into that, it turned out that the account that was compromised was somebody who no longer existed in the organization. The account had just been left to linger. So no one's going to update that password, and because the password policy and other things weren't in place, it kind of got left there as one day this will get hacked, whether it's in a month or a year or 10 years. And we've seen that quite a lot. There was another organisation, and I kid you not, they had there was a system that was available on the internet, and that system had been around for 20 years. It was a core system. And there was one account that was the account that everybody used in this organization, about 20, 30 people used. The account went through many different hands of people that came into the company and left. And one day, when they did get breached, it turned out that account was hacked. It was, again, a weak password, but it was even more intense because it was a password that had existed for a long, long time, had never been changed for 10 years, and really just had been sat there waiting for someone to get in. And so those two scenarios, and that can carry on inside the network. If someone gets in, then they're looking for that account that they can enable. Is there an account that exists already, or a way for me to sort of fly under the radar? Because whilst, we see a lot of these things in the news and stuff, a lot of these attacks are quite subtle, really. They don't want to cause concern. They don't want to be, triggering alerts. They want to stay under the radar. They don't want to email, as Tim was on about with phishing. They're not going to email like 1,000 people, really, in everyone in the organisation. They're going to find the new chap that started at Proact, right? And we're going to go for him. And that's what we're going to do. And if we're not successful with him, we're going to find somebody else. And I say that as the general one, not that that's what we do as a security service, not as a black hat. But yeah, that's what, another piece of that puzzle, really. And really going back to what Tim said about the sort of people looking after security themselves, that is a massive part of it. Whether it's your parents, your family, your friends, people, we're all getting targeted at work and at home. And I think the other thing to drive home is, that we're in this together in terms of security of the organisation. And I've known stories of people opening emails at work, right? Because they think they can trust works, IT will deal with it, and basically putting the company at risk. And what they really hopefully don't realise is that if if your company gets compromised, there's a cost to the company. It's going to hurt them financially through the ransomware, through extortion, through downtime, through fines from the ICO or wherever it comes from. So kind of, you're responsible at work, just as you wouldn't do so. You would, if you saw a tap running, hopefully you'd turn the tap off, and you saw a fire in a room, you'd pull the fire alarm. It's kind of the same thing. You want to really look after the company and the assets, really. And even you having weak passwords yourself as a user on a certain platform, if you then reuse that password on your Office 365 account, like, there might not be a very obvious link, but oh god, the malicious parties out there that are out to make the money, they will try to pull those links together and map people. And we all know the amount of data Facebook and everybody holds on us, and that amount of data is probably replicated in some format with these organised crime syndicates, and it is, and we've seen that. So it's really also personal, me looking after my security as an extension of my work, and looking after each other. And I do think the last point would be, companies need to also, it's nice for them to maybe help their staff and say, this is not just for you at home. This is for you when you're buying, Amazon presents at Christmas, so you don't get hit on a personal level. So it can hopefully cover both sides, make it better for both parties, the employer and the employee, really.
Right, selling it internally. But it sounds, from an IT manager perspective, which I like to try to take, it sounds like we are on a small boat with a lot of holes in them, in it, and the holes are of various sizes. And all I'm trying to do is plug all these holes. We are slowly sinking, and also my job involves taking the whole company forward from an IT perspective, drive innovation.
But that's where you got to ask yourself, right? Is your job security or IT manager? Because the IT manager's security is just one of the things he's got to do. He's also got to keep systems updated, patched, running, operational for everybody. So he might get 10% of his time to focus on the security area. So the IT manager, that's just one thing, and he might have a dedicated security person. He might even have a team. But for many organizations, it's just work for somebody who technically is in charge of something else. That's what we usually come across.
Exactly, and that brings me to my, when I was on my first security class at the university that I went to studying computer science, I was super excited. I mean, security 101 kind of. And we had this professor who was, great professor, had his own company on the side, very a bit famous security guy. And one of the first thing he told us was, security is super interesting to me and to the security people. But for everyone else, security is expensive and boring, kind of like insurance. And when listening to you now, it reminds me of that, because it's mostly a cost, right? It doesn't bring anything business-wise to a company normally, if you're not a security company, obviously. So that's must be one of the hardest parts. I'm alone as an IT manager. Maybe I don't care too much, but I really should. And how do I get the budget? And what is that normally? How does that normally go? Because some people had to die before the seatbelt in the cars was invented by a Swedish guy, by the way. Is that normally how it goes before customers come to you to talk?
Yeah.
Has something happened?
Unfortunately, yes. So we kind of get two reasons we get approached, right? One of them is compliance. A company gets told by a potential or prospective customer that you need to have these things in place for us to work with you. So it's a tick box exercise. We're demonstrating that we put the right controls in place. But that in itself is just really a case of showing somebody else that you've done something right. There isn't necessarily a will there to grow that out. It's just to meet the minimum viable requirement that you do in order to be that compliance. The other side is often impact through somebody they know, okay? So a partner, a provider, a customer, a competitor. Somebody is senior in the business, hears about one of these attacks, and then they say, right, what have we got? How can this happen to us, okay? That drives awareness. If that isn't there in the first place, then yeah, you're kind of asking a business to spend money on something that they don't really see. And the reality is, it becomes a problem when it happens to you. It's like having a car accident. If you had the option not to buy insurance on the basis that you thought you were a great driver and you didn't think anybody else should ever crash into you because the roads are always quiet where you drive, you might make the decision not to buy insurance and take the risk. I bought insurance for years and not had to claim on it. So in theory, I'd quite like that money back. And that money would cover the cost of an accident if I had one in that period of time, right? So you got to kind of think of it like that. It is an insurance policy. You're protecting yourself against the likelihood, really, or helping to protect yourself that something could happen. And I think that is a challenge for businesses. I used to work in infrastructure where you sell a storage array. It's bigger, it's faster, it puts more data on it. You can copy more data off it. You can back more data up. These are obvious things, the reason to upgrade, the reason to buy it. But also, these have been, for a long time, fundamental parts of the infrastructure that you need as a business to operate, right? You've got to have some servers. You've got to have some storage. You've got to have some networks. You don't need security to function as a business.
No.
And that's the challenge with it. So a business doesn't look at that and go, well, if we invest this much money in security, this is our return on investment in the next 5 years. The way you could look at it is we're far less likely to have a catastrophic outage or be hacked in the next 5 years. But if it hasn't happened to you, it's just people like me telling you that it could happen. So it's a certain element of selling, people see that as sort of selling security through fear, whereas you're not. You're just giving them the reality of what might happen. So that is a challenge.
Yeah. Well, the same challenge as insurance companies and alarm companies have been selling their stuff all years.
Exactly. This is really interesting you mentioned that, because we're starting to see now the outcome of cyber insurance policies where businesses have just sold them for years, but they don't really know what they're selling because they don't really understand the consequences. And now you've got companies going, oh, well, we've just paid $30 million ransom. Thanks very much. Here's our claim. So the cybersecurity companies are now having a massive panic because they're realizing that this isn't profitable business. Because businesses are saying, and you hear this said, right? So, CIOs, CSOs, they're saying, well, we'll just buy the insurance. That's our risk mitigation, right? We buy the insurance, and then if we do get ransomware, we'll just pay it and make the insurance company. That's not sustainable to go forward like that. But that's, insurance likewise, exactly the same thing.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned a cool word that sounded like a movie, organized crime syndicates.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Tell me more about those. Who are they? What do they want? And how do they work? What they want, we know. We know what they want. But how do they work? What's up with that?
I'll touch on this a bit, and then Neil's been on the ground and seen the sort of the results of how these guys operate. So I'll let him cover some of it off too. But what we're talking about here is we're talking about an industry that's incredibly lucrative. Okay. Bear in mind that in theory, a bunch of relatively non-skilled professional hackers now can go and buy a set of tooling that was pre-made for them and then execute their plan on a business and charge millions of dollars a ransom, and they can do it with very, very little chance of getting caught because there are, and I'm not going to name them, there are a lot of states in this world that harbour these activities, don't really see them as crimes and don't actually chase after anybody unless they do it in their own country. So you've got this sort of industry of you can make lots of money, okay? You can do it in relative anonymity, and there's very little chance that you're actually going to get caught for it, and you don't have to be particularly skilled to undertake it. So what we've seen an ecosystem of, you've got the big criminal organizations who specialize in ransomware, but if you look at the way they're structured, they actually have, a bit like we as a business, right? So we work with other partners to provide software and services and stuff that complements our portfolio. It's very much the same thing. So you've got guys that focus now on just getting the access. They're called access brokers, and their job is entirely to just open the front door, the initial break-in, then they sell that to somebody else. And then the gang that buy that probably employ people who develop their own ransomware for the environments that they're going to attack. So it's this whole ecosystem of supporting organizations that work together to do this kind of thing. But
partnerships.
The profits are into the billions, literally billions. I mean, we've got hackers putting pictures on Instagram of, fabulously coloured Lamborghinis driving around, the streets of St. Petersburg, openly saying, look, we've retired. We've made so much money. We're going to step away from this now and go and do something else. And there's very little anyone can do about it because, as I say, there's not really much culpability. So we're huge amounts of money. And whenever there's large amounts of money for criminal activities, I'm not a criminal expert by any means, but I think it's safe to assume that organised crime will get involved if that's the situation.
Yeah.
Just to add that working in cybersecurity as one of the good guys also pays very well, and you don't get the risk of going to prison.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. What Tim says is true, though, is that there is a lot of money there, and because all the reasons we've mentioned already of, people want to pay for their data, they want to get it back. But I guess just to add on to what Tim said is when we've been working with incidents and again it's quite horrible sometimes. You see companies and people in real emotional distress. You've got people at sea level on the board, people on the ground, the person that clicked the original email link, all emotionally drained, and really it's really a horrible situation when it does happen. So there's a money effect, but there's also a psychological effect. I've known people that have left companies because they clicked the link and not necessarily their fault as such. We're all human, we make mistakes, but they click the link and they know that link clicking cost the company X, Y, and Z of time and emotional stress and pressure and everything. And they've left companies, and decent people have left companies because of that reason. But more so on the actual sort of the people doing these crimes. Is we see different levels of activity or different skill levels. So the idea is that we've seen some companies that have been sort of hacked. And when we've done the incident response and we've tried to understand what they've done, where they've been, how they've acted, we've seen some really sloppy work. We've seen threat actors dropping Mac sort of ransomware or trying to, Mac viruses, and they do exist, just very rare, on Windows machines. Like we've seen people that kind of like, it looks like someone's got, a few YouTube videos, spent $100 and got access to some tools, and they do a very bad job at it. But sometimes they'll just keep going and they'll make their way through, and they can still cause some damage, especially even more so because they don't know what they're doing. And then on the other side, you've got, this other level of sort of attackers who are very, very skilled, very, very capable, and can take a network and systems to pieces in a very short period of time. And just the spread of the skill level shows us that it's not just these elite, malicious hackers and organized crime rings. It passes through, somebody in a country where basically, maybe not many opportunities. They can easily go on YouTube, find some information, download some tools, and have at it really. And that's kind of the game that we're seeing. Is it's a very big spread, but the tools and the techniques, whilst in the hands of a better person are going to do more damage, they can still be very damaging, because these tools and techniques have been refined over many years now, and they've got to a good position really, which is really unfortunate. But again, there's lots of things that we can do to prevent against this, and to defend. But it still comes down to that original problem of poor IT manager. I've got to fix these things and I've got to fix everything whilst keeping everything running. And we've got this at the moment. We're working with a company who have had an incident, and they've done a really good job at sort of recovering from it and getting on top of it and trying to get their security working. But all of their IT team have day jobs. And it's really difficult. They're very capable. And when we have conversations with them and say, I'm our fictional guy, Fred, what you should have done is this, or have you thought about doing this? And they'll say, oh, of course, that's a great idea. I just need, 60 hours in a day and I'll be able to do that. And so it's a time and back to maybe resourcing and people seeing that security costs money. If I spend money on R&D or marketing, I'll get some kind of benefit. But if I spend money on security, nothing happens. And that is actually perfect. But it's trying to get that across, and if anyone knows the answer to that, tell me, because whoever works that one out will probably be a very successful cybersecurity company. But it's trying to get that message across that you're here to help, and there is a benefit, and the benefit is that you'll be able to continue doing all the things that you want to do to keep your business going, rather than having to spend a month dealing with an incident.
Yeah, and we're seeing stuff commoditized and packaged now, right? So you're talking about organized crime. Well, we sell services in our organization. We sell IT services. You can buy this stuff packaged. You don't need to be a hacker. You don't need to understand the tool. And you can go out and you can rent ransomware for hire. Ransomware as a service, if we call it that, okay? Which is, you just quite simply tell them the organization you want to target, and there'll be a cut involved for them. There'll be some information you'll have that they don't. But you're basically buying this stuff packaged up. So you don't even really need to have the understanding anymore yourself. You can just go out and buy it as a service.
Like anything else, really. That's astonishing. But when it comes to the IT manager perspective again, you mentioned, Neil, that investing in other things might give you a measurable something back, right? But couldn't you, if the culture is right, if you invest in security first of all, the IT team could be the saviors of the day, and you should be able to, in some cases at least, be able to measure all the things that you've prevented, right? Which in turn could, you could put the value upon that, and so suddenly you have that investment financed.
No, and I agree entirely. And I saw this in a meeting last week firsthand. So one of the directors, right? He had access. This is post-incident. He had access to several dashboards, right? Just a nice dash. Everyone likes, most people at least, like a dashboard. You can see things. And these dashboards were to do with, the anti-malware solution that they had in place. It was to do with a vulnerability scanner, and it was to do with phishing, a phishing simulation that they'd done. And what they could see is, well, a month ago, we had all these reds, we had all these fails, we had all these criticals. And I know this isn't the entirety of security, but it's a nice picture. But you can show that, actually, and it represents the work that's been done. So months ago, we had lots of machines that maybe didn't have the antivirus, anti-malware installed, wasn't functioning with these errors. And now we've got more green ticks and green banners. We saw when we first did the phishing campaign, 20% of people fell for it. Now we're down to 4%. And then we can maybe go for some training for those people. And patch management, as Tim mentioned, vulnerability scanning and just general keeping things, up to security. A lot of those dashboards are all with percentages and nice green icons and red icons for bad, and that can give somebody who doesn't want to be involved on the day-to-day basis. But I think it's a great point we made that can help them say, look at what we've done. We've come so far, and there's further to go. But we can show some value in terms of the changes that are made, not just saying, we're spending thousands of pounds on things and stuff's happening. You can give a tangible product, and in some ways, like a bit of gamification. So with the phishing, right? You can try to make a carrot rewards for people that notice phishes. Rewards for people that sort of report them to the right people and stuff like that. And I've even seen leaderboards and all things like that to sort of really be positive in terms of security. And obviously you keep the stick for the person who's still clicking the links, 20 times over. Obviously doesn't care. There's a difference of psychology there. But yeah, generally I think you're right. There's finding the positives and the ways to present stuff to people that at all levels that they can understand and act on. So the IT manager can say, look at what we've done. Look, you gave me that money. We've invested it in this and this way, and we've made some improvements on these fronts. There's still more to go, but the core controls, the things that matter the most, we've got them to a certain level now, and we can continue to do that. Really.
And that's why I think the culture's so important, right? I think the culture is really important because you need to have people recognizing that, everybody in the business has kind of got a role to play in this. So most people recognize they're not just going to let somebody off the street into the accounts office and sit them down at a desk. Okay, if somebody knocks on the door, in a restricted part of the building, people kind of get that. But it all disappears with things like email and phishing, and people just, because it's IT, it's sort of you're moving into this like world that doesn't really exist, and people just forget or don't recognize, and I think that's a big part of it, is that getting people to recognize culturally as a business what this stuff actually means. And actually, if your business gets taken out with a ransomware attack, it's your livelihood as well, right? Because you work there. You don't want to work for a business that's going to go under.
True. So when let's say you've got the funding, you're starting to implement stuff, have you seen any common mistakes people do, like thinking they're secure?
Oh yeah,
and then they're
absolutely.
not really.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll use SIEM as an example, the login stuff, right? So we talk a lot about getting this visibility and seeing what's going on, and people go out, they procure these platforms, they install them, and then guess what? They make a lot of noise. And somebody needs to understand what that noise is telling them, because it's going to send somebody 10,000 alarms a day. So what do? They ignore it, or they turn it off. Or
alert fatigue.
Yeah, there you go, alert fatigue, right? So this is a common term we hear a lot now, and it's very true, because same things with like endpoint controls and firewalls, is they give you all this information, but you can't just put them in and leave them. That's not how they work. You have to put them in, you have to understand what they're doing, what they're telling you, you have to tune them, and then it's a life cycle of management after that. They're not something that you can, just let's put a big door on and then it'll stop somebody coming through that wall, right? We've got to constantly open that door to check whether somebody should be coming through it and so on. So there's a lot that needs to be done to sort of manage this stuff. And people often see security as if they make the investment, that's good enough. Okay, if they go out and buy this control, they don't need to do anything else because they've spent the money. And that's how the business often perceives it. Well, what do you mean you need a security engineer? You just made us spend 100,000 euros on this really cool antivirus. Isn't that going to protect us? But haven't we got a firewall? Isn't that going to protect us? So it's getting people to recognize that these things require management. They require the skills to be able to understand and interpret the data and to be able to react to it. And that's the challenge. It tends to go to the IT manager, like yourself, right? You know, well, you go and buy something and make it work. You know, you tell us what we need to buy and then we'll pay for it. But actually, it's an ongoing strategy in the business around what you're going to do and evolve around security.
So if I'm tactical, I would maybe start educating the whole organization in security before pitching for what I really want to buy or invest in, perhaps. As you mentioned, security is a culture or becoming a more broad culture, but perhaps that should be a part of every company's agenda at all levels, at all times. Yeah, and have you ever met a company that actually has met that goal? That is the perfect, wow, they are breathing security.
Depends what you define as perfect.
Which is not a security company.
I think it really depends. I haven't personally. I've spoken to a few organisations where I found that they've got a much more mature posture and profile than others. But I don't think I've ever been somewhere where I've thought there's absolutely no way that these guys will ever suffer any kind of problem, right? Because the reality is they have human beings working for them, and we know that that's the first weakest link. Hence the social engineering side. So if they employ people of any sort, there's a potential weak spot there. It doesn't matter what the other technological controls are that surround it. Obviously you've got different classifications, central government and, the military and so on, where there may be an element to that. But in your average enterprise, no, not really. I haven't come across it.
Interesting. I think it's good for our listeners to hear.
But what's secure now, okay, or what's considered to be the best thing you can have may not be in a year's time because it moves so quickly. Right?
Exactly. So that brings us to actually something I wanted to go into. We've been talking about what today's attacks are and how they work and how big these organized crime syndicates are and so on. But do you have any idea what tomorrow's attacks will be?
I think the future of. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to speculate here, right? But what I can,
of course.
What I'm fairly sure we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of autonomous reasoning, or let's call it AI. Okay, this is the buzzword in the industry, where we're going to see. We already know that the internet's scanned by lots of little, bots and botnets, these things you hear about. So we know the internet's always been probed and scanned, and your organization always has been. I think we're going to see more AI based around how to circumvent the AI technologies that are there to detect it. So let me put that into context, right? We have AI today that says, if I log onto my laptop and do certain things, and I do something different, the AI is going to go, hey, that's different, right? So I've learned your behavior, and now we've moved away from that. But what if you have AI that can do the opposite, which is learn how to behave in a way that doesn't trigger these alarms and these tools? So I think we're moving towards this, right? I think we're moving towards the battle of the AI systems, the offensive and the defensive. Absolutely, yeah. It's a bit Terminator-esque, but honestly, I think that's where we're going.
Very interesting. Neil, let me hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't have one as futuristic, but from what sort of more middle term, there's a lot of companies moving to Azure and AWS, right? They've been around for a long time of Azure and AWS. And new companies, small agile ones are probably already, they're already there. But I'm seeing a lot of companies that are now making the leap and the move to them. And I think the pandemic has pushed that a lot. And there's a lot of really great, awesome features in these cloud platforms, but there's not the experience. So there's loads of knowledge bases online. So you want to put on a server in Azure, you can do. You want to build your new web application in Azure, you want to use an AWS microservice, Lambda functions, whatever it is, great. But people are walking into this world and it's new. And the configuration, the security, there's differences. There's lots of security features, but also things like, traditionally you might have a DMZ, you might have sort of firewalls and things set up. You go to Azure, those exist, but they don't exist in the same way, and you don't apply them in the same way. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting sort of scenarios coming up, and a lot of education and resource needed for people to be able to migrate and move securely. And that's down to, again, time and people, hey guys, can we go to AWS next year? We're going to do this. Great. But do the people that have been tasked with that, have they been given the right amount of time and skills and education, and have they got get on a Udemy course, or have they had time to read Microsoft's pages and pages of documentation of how to do it? Probably not.
Yeah.
And that's where I can see, and I have seen recently a number of challenges, and I think that's going to become more apparent, really, as basically the lessons of the past. 20 years ago, attacks that existed, they still exist now, but they exist in a different context because they're applied to a different system. And every time we have a jump, whether it's AI, machine learning, or into the cloud, it's going to bring that with it as well. That here's a new paradigm, here's a new platform, and the bad guys are really great at finding the problems, because a lot of them are just recycled from the past and reapplied to the new technology. So it's never going to end, unfortunately, or fortunately if you work in security.
But it's in the cloud, right? So surely AWS and Microsoft, they're experts. So you put your data in their platforms, then what's the problem, right? It's secure. It's more secure than it was in your data center because it's in AWS. Is that true? No, it's not, and that's the problem.
The psychology, agreed. Yeah,
people feel that that's taking the problem away, right? Because they're putting it into Amazon, they're putting it into Microsoft or Google, and these guys, these are the big tech players. These guys are specialists in security, so therefore they've got thousands of people who work on this. So we're going to put our data in there because that will make it safe. But actually, the controls that typically get exploited, they're not responsible for. You are. They're just giving you a platform. You're responsible for all of the other stuff. And that's, again, it's just a misconception that so many organizations see the cloud as it's sort of all managed by somebody else. And some of that's true, which is why they adopt it, but some of it isn't. And the reality is...
So far, we've been talking about security in a general sense and conceptually only thinking about your data center, right? And now we're talking about a cloud. But we all know that the companies today are looking to utilize the best parts of every cloud, multi-cloud. So this problem suddenly becomes, a lot bigger as soon as you're starting to utilize 3 different clouds, 4 SaaS solutions. You still have your on-prem stuff. Backup is outsourced, perhaps. Wow. I'm happy that I'm not an IT manager for real in that situation.
Yeah.
Any comments on that? How do you bind it together, everything?
So, you're absolutely right. The logical boundary of an organization is not what it used to be, right? So Neil mentioned the demilitarized zone concept, and we typically think of an organization as we've got all this IT equipment, okay, and there's servers full of racks full of servers, and there's people sat at desks and they're consuming this equipment, and then we've got the perimeter, the outside world. And we know we've got some web servers, and we know people can dial into that VPN platform to get into the organization from home, and we publish some applications online and so on. Well, that in reality is not the way that most systems look today. There isn't really a perimeter isn't really as defined as it used to be. It's logical. So Office 365 is your perimeter because people can log onto a web interface. And you're right, SaaS platforms, exactly the same thing. Now, the way that we consume IT now is largely moving towards a browser, right? So the future of IT, I think, we're going to look at lots of SaaS platforms and everything's consumed through browsers. That's typically what we, that's kind of where we see things going today and where things are moving to. So, but these platforms, what you really need to understand is, there are controls built into them from a security point of view, so that's important. But if you think about what's changed is we've always wanted to understand how people are interacting with things, from a login point of view, for example. So being able to understand how people are interacting with their SaaS platform is just as important. So real simplistic example, if you log into your SaaS platform from Venezuela at 2:00 in the afternoon on Saturday, right? That's not normal. It doesn't matter that it's a SaaS platform, that's unusual. But the SaaS platform isn't going to do anything about that because it's designed to be online and accessible from Venezuela at 2:00 in the morning, right? But it's going to create an alarm to say you've did it. And that's just exactly the same thing as if you logged into your Office VPN from some other country at 4:00 in the morning, okay? There's a log to tell you that. So the intelligence that you put across the top is just really the same thing, but it's expected behavior. So you've got a kind of baseline. What do you expect to see on these platforms? All right, so take COVID, good example of this. We talked about this earlier, right? So everyone's now working from home, which means you're going to see all these unusual logins, locations at strange times because that's the culture that we're in at the moment. So you have to adapt to that. You have to recognize that that's actually something we're expecting to see. You have to kind of baseline it a little bit, and then you have to look for, well, what would be an abnormality in that situation because that's your new threat. And it is a challenge. It's moving very quickly. You're right. People are putting things in, They put data in one platform and then they have application data in another platform, but that brings other challenges, right? So where is your data? How is that data protected in a SaaS platform or typically on infrastructure platforms? Because you're putting it in somebody else's computer. That's the reality. So how are you auditing what happens to it, where else it goes, how it's protected, who's accessing it? Exactly the same challenges. The only difference is really that SaaS technologies make it easier to interact with things than it has been because you've got APIs that you can talk to. It's easier to consolidate that information and get it into one place. But your IT platform is no longer what it used to be, which is 3 servers at the bottom of a cupboard, right? It's now somewhere out there in the ether, and it's multiple web applications and SaaS platforms that people need to have different logins and different access to. So there's a couple of things you've seen in the last few years in the industry, right? So Google pioneered something called BeyondCore, which was all about trusting access to people. So today we trust you because it's you. How do we know it's you? Well, because you gave your username and password, so it must be you, right? So let's let him on the network and let him run riot and do what he likes. But there's other things we could do there. We could say, well, is it him? I don't think it is because he's not using a Proact laptop and he's not logging in from where he normally does. So there's 3 areas there we can now sort of take to determine whether that's potentially a risk to the organization. And that's usually what we look at on the SaaS platforms, because by their very design, the nature of their design is to allow them to be incredibly accessible from anywhere. But that kind of goes against the grain of the way security used to work, which is we only let people access things from certain places to reduce the risk. So,
but that needs, in that case, you would need that SaaS platform that you are choosing to have APIs for you to be able to suck that into your user behavior analytics tool, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess most SaaS platforms don't necessarily have that, which kind of narrows down your choosing of a product, which in turn is one needs standards in a way.
Yes, most SaaS platforms will have those kind of features today. I mean, we'll take Office 365 being the obvious one, right? That's
a big
all
player.
sorts of. It is a big player, but SaaS platform, there's thousands of them out there, but we focus on the ones that we tend to typically see, right? So Salesforce, Microsoft, as examples. So those platforms, they're definitely built to allow that kind of intelligence to be extrapolated from them. But I'm trying to think of a more niche SaaS platform, one that isn't specifically in the IT industry or in security. Then you may be right. There may not be the ability to log the information that you need from it. Also, you're relying on the SaaS provider not to have a vulnerability. Okay, so one of the reasons we like SaaS is because it's somebody else's problem to patch it and maintain it and make sure it's up and running. It's not ours. All we've got to do is consume it. But if they're not doing that job very well, then your data's at risk because you're using that SaaS platform. So you're relying on their security controls.
Right. Okay. So Neil, where do I start then? What should I do? What should I do now? We've talked about the future. We've talked about big crime syndicates and Lamborghinis. We've talked about. We touched upon almost every part of IT so far. If I'm listening to this, where should I start? Give me the tips, that I need. What's
the tips? So many. But I think what we said at the start, a lot of that would apply here, wouldn't it? Kind of just your general basic hygiene is, your people, your users, people who work in the company, making sure that the culture is right, that they know to ask the questions, they know who to ask, and that from board all the way down to people on the ground, that people feel comfortable in asking questions, in what they do day to day, and they're made of, again, I use the word awareness, but it's so important because as everything changes, we talk about Terminators and we go back in the past and we talk about kind of probably, I'm sure there were some vulnerabilities in the original computer if you went all the way back there, and people stealing ciphers in Egyptian times, right? Like across the year, many years, there's always been this, security has always been an issue because it's always been a requirement. So it's and throughout the sort of years, it's always been about the people that that are being used. If you want to talk, world wars and stuff, and they've, ciphers being broken as well back then, that can, people against, good guys, bad guys, or just two different entities against each other. And it always comes down to the people that are doing the good things or the wrong things in terms of how they're conducting themselves. But we have to educate people and make sure they feel comfortable in what they do and that they know what to do. And whether that's the IT manager or someone at C-level who's never even heard of ransomware or something else, and think it's not my problem. I've had one IT manager admit to me 2 years ago that I'm retiring in 6 months. I don't care. So trying to remove that. It's like, okay, great, you're retiring in 6 months. Maybe you should, fair enough, you want to have a nice, easy ride out onto the sunset. But maybe bring the next guy in and start to train that person up and give them responsibilities.
Or he could do, go all in and go crazy because what are you going to do? Fire me?
Yeah. So he could actually try to do, let's do something crazy. Let's do something a bit like, push the barriers and push the boundaries.
Yeah.
So I think, it's the specific ones, passwords, authentication, really. Even with what you guys were just saying about, SaaS platforms. Well, is it a username password? Is it multi-factor authentication? Honestly, the number of phishes, the number of attacks we've seen against, software as a service platforms, MFA would, in a lot of cases, defend people. Fred clicks that link, Fred gives his Office 365 details over, but bang, Fred gets a text message. Why have I got a text message? I wasn't logging into Office 365. Hopefully Fred then contacts the IT team and goes, I don't know what I did wrong, but this has happened. And it stopped them at that point. And across all the different SaaS platforms, at least having MFA would raise the bar to a certain degree. And goes back to your other point of maybe they don't all have MFA and stuff like that, and it's down to the decisions that are made. But you really want stuff that users can just take, nice and easy. And I think receiving a text message is one of the most simple things. Although I've been told in the past, well, I don't have a phone. I need you to issue me a corporate phone if we're going to have MFA. And I think, really? Wow. It's always full of challenges. But I think that can be a big improvement. And the other one I would say, which does link also to your SaaS question, was so what we do when we use cloud platform for things, where possible, we use a VPN. So instead of having the entry point over there, we have the entry point with the user. So the user's on a laptop, right? The user's laptop connects to a VPN. That VPN gives them access to certain cloud platforms, if possible. Not all will allow it, through some, kind of allow listing. So you can try and say, all right, we've got rid of the perimeter, but maybe we put the perimeter all the way on the computer of the user, which then connects. And don't get me wrong, there's issues there. What if your VPN fails or you can't get on it, and half a day off work maybe if you can't access your services. But with every one of these new solutions or ideas comes challenges. But I think it's to innovate, isn't it? And to try to give the IT manager, yourself, solutions that are easy to implement, quick wins that they can show some value, and then we'll worry about the more bigger problems and challenges that require lots of budget and expenses.
Yeah, I mean the password side of it, right? So we know that how much of a challenge that is. Let's be realistic. 90% of people use a password that sits in a list of like 10,000. Okay, it's not difficult to guess people's passwords. This is done by machines. Okay, they can guess billions of attempts in very short periods of time. So if you've got weak password policy, that's a problem. Also, permissions is the other thing we see, right? So everybody in the organization has got the highest level of access to everything. Why is that necessary? Because what that means is any one of them can be socially engineered, have their account compromised, and then that's really easy for the hackers, right? Because the guy that they've socially engineered who works in logistics has got admin rights to be able to go and delete all the data. And so, you were saying, well, what do I approach first? What's the password policy like? As Neil said, 2FA is a quick win. It is difficult sometimes with user adoption, but it's a quick win across your applications and your SaaS apps for sure. I mean, everything I've got today constantly badgers me to enable 2FA, even my thermostat controls at home, right? Because this is where we are now. And I think 2FA is just going to become a problem as well, because people are going to have too many codes and too many apps and too many things to remember. And that's why we've got a problem with passwords, because people can't remember anything. They don't write them on a Post-it just because it seems like a good idea. They're told that they've got to have complex passwords. It's got to have uppercase, lowercase, special characters. It's got to be at least 50 characters long, and you must use a different one for everything you log into. That's just not sustainable, right? The average even I reuse passwords. Okay, obviously, I don't reuse my my corporate credentials or my bank password on, on a forum I might log into. But the reality is, I have a set of passwords that I use for stuff that isn't really important, where if they're compromised, a good mechanism with passwords is to string together a sentence. Passwords are cracked by machines, not people. The machine is interested in the length and the number of possible combinations. So if you've got a password that's 40 characters long, I don't care if it's all lowercase. That's a lot stronger than an 8-character password that's got a special character in it, right? So that, these are sort of things that you can look to educate people around. Something else that I think's probably worth, I sometimes look at security from a selfish point of view. I think it's about looking more defended than your neighbour's house, okay? I had an alarm for many years that was nothing more than a box on the wall. It was a big brand and everyone saw that and went, oh, that alarm rings the police if it goes off, so we won't break into that house. It didn't, it was just a box on the wall. But the perception was that I was more secure than my neighbours' houses because they didn't have the box on the wall. Okay, so if you're on a street and, just go back to what I said before, is your business isn't necessarily targeted by a person to start with. It could be a botnet harvesting logins and then selling them on, okay? So if your perception of security from the point of attacker is very weak because you've got loads of vulnerable servers on the internet that have never been patched, rest assured, this stuff's out there now, right? We can run reports on companies and we can see what their security posture's like without even needing to understand them, just because of the information that everything in their organization sends out to the internet and gets monetized. You open your browser, you connect to a website. The website knows what version of Windows you're using, it knows what patch versions you're running. Many businesses commoditize all that information, they monetize that information by selling it on, and then that tells other people what the situational awareness in your organization is like, right? So you could be a really weak target for things like that. So you don't want to be the weakest looking target. So if you're on like I say, metaphorically speaking, I'm on a street and I'm the only house with no gates and no dogs and no alarm and no floodlights, no security controls whatsoever. All the other houses have all this stuff, right? Whose house is more likely to get targeted? It's mine. So again, it's about, that you need to at least look pretty strong at the front line, which means you're not publishing loads of vulnerable stuff on the internet and, you've got easy passwords to guess and you've got staff who are publishing all sorts of information that could be used to compromise the business. So that's very important.
Just to add, guys, Tim has a dog and his alarm now works fully, so don't get any ideas.
That's right. Yeah, it's only a small dog though. It's not particularly. It's not particularly scary. I like to use metaphors when I'm explaining. I've probably spoken to you about this before, but one of the things that when we're talking about SIEM in particular, right, this is a focal point of ours as an organisation. It is logging and explaining to customers why this visibility is so important. And I like to talk about it metaphorically speaking and comparing it to a burglary. Okay. So the way I describe it is you come home and you realize something's missing. That's the first indication you got, okay? I've got something valuable, I've gone to get it, it's gone, whatever that may be. So what runs through your mind is, okay, well, the only way that could be gone is somebody must have broken in. Now, I've now worked out that it's not somewhere else, somebody must have broken in, right? So I don't know how they got in. I don't know what else they took. I don't know how long they were in the property for. I don't know if they've been back. So how am I supposed to fix any of these issues, right? So I can't even tell you how they got in, so I can't go and fix that problem. I can't go and shut that door to stop them getting back. I don't know what my damage looks like because I don't really know what was taken. Why not? Because I haven't got an inventory. And so many businesses don't. They don't have an inventory of all their assets and where their data is. So they're effectively completely blind. They don't know what the damage is to the organization. They don't know, if you lose data, you're obliged to report it. You have to, for GDPR reasons, you have to say, we've lost some personal information. But if all you can say is we think we have, but we don't really know what it was because we didn't have anything in place to tell us what went missing. And that's metaphorically speaking where so many businesses find themselves. They realize months and months and months later that something bad has happened, but they've no idea what. And then they're getting pressure, and Neil sees it a lot. We're working in sort of instant response. Then you're going to get pressure from the business to say, somebody tell us, okay, where we are from a situational point of view. Where are we? What have we lost? What do we need? Who do we need to inform? Do we need to tell our customers to go and change all their passwords and bank account details? Because no one wants to do that, right? That's an embarrassing situation to be in. But if you don't know categorically that's not the case, then you have to do it anyway.
Yeah,
and that's where
then you're in a real
shit
situation.
Absolutely. Anything want to add to that? I mean, you see this stuff a lot on the ground, right? So you go into the aftermath.
Oh yeah, and the question is, so Neil, how did we get breached? Neil, what data did they get? And I'm sat there going,
Where's your logs?
Yeah. Where's the information? Like, I can't pull it. I can make assumptions and predictions and what's there. I mean, some companies don't have any logs, and some have a lot of logs, and some are somewhere in between. And it's a difficult question to answer. And you want to give them an answer. You want to tell them. You want to make them feel better, or at least understand what's going on. And when you don't, the crime's already committed. You know, the CCTV wasn't running. You know, the tape has been overwritten, or it had been ejected, and it's that kind of scenario, and you just can't give that confidence. All you can do is, based on the bits of information that we have, this is the most likely scenario, and nobody wants to go to the ICO with that story, really, because even though you don't, by not having anything, you might say, well, we don't know what happened, so therefore, maybe nothing bad happened. They take the worst case scenario more so than the best case. You know, it's better to say, well, we've got actually good visibility, and we think it's highly likely they got this, but probably not likely they got that. Whereas they go, well, we have no idea, so let's just carry on. He's probably not the conversation you want to have.
Pay the ransom and ring the insurance provider, right, and give them the bill. That's it.
Yes.
So that is what a SIM really mediates. Is that your message, Tim?
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Is that what a SIM really mediates this issue? Using your own or someone else's.
I think if I was going to explain SIM really, really quickly, right, it's just that, it's visibility, okay? So, Neil will tell you this. You go to see a customer, they've had a breach, and they go, well, we did get some alarms, right, from this antivirus tool, or the firewall was giving us these alarms, but we didn't do anything with it because we didn't really understand it, or we were busy, or they went to somebody who's left, or something like that, right? So if you have that information, just going back to what I said earlier, these hacks don't happen in 5 minutes, okay? Somebody could be on your network for weeks before they actually do anything. And in that time, they're going to make noise. They're going to do things that should become apparent if you're logging and you've got eyes on what's going on, okay?
So to your analogy, someone is sleeping in your attic for weeks.
Kind of. Yeah. Right, but you can hear them walking around, right? So you might go and see if they're in there. But if they're walking around with no shoes on and they're tiptoeing, and you never go in your attic, you don't know they're there. So one night when they drop down through the hatch, okay, and they steal things and then disappear, that's when you realise it's happened, because you weren't looking in the attic because you didn't think anybody would be in there. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. So we talked so much about the issues, the problems, some solutions as well, obviously, and tips and tricks. But what makes a security professional smile? Do you have any, let's wrap this episode up with a positive story. And I know you have some.
Well, I guess from the, it's always refreshing when you go into an organisation and they sort of already, they got. I mean, from my point of view, we're encouraging them to work with us and use our services. So if they don't need any of that, that's not going to be great. But I think from the what would make a security professional smile, if you're in an organisation and there's recognition of the problem, right? So you can have real conversations with people, and they understand the basics of what you're trying. Remember, people can be very defensive, right? When you go into an organisation and you tell them that, basically it's a bag of spanners, they don't want to hear that, okay? And they don't want to be the one to go and break the news that the investments they've made and probably paid quite substantially for aren't necessarily adequate. So, that's, I think from the point of view, I haven't been involved in a situation where you're kind of bailing a customer out of a bad situation per se. It's more been working with guys like Neil from Samurai, but I think there's a certain sense of reward when we've had a couple of instances recently where we know, this could be the end of this organisation, right? But we've managed to sort of rescue that situation and get them back up and running and functional again. That's quite a rewarding feeling for a number of, one, because you've helped a client, but you've also taken money away from, frankly, scumbags, okay? You've taken something away from these organised crime gangs, and you've taken away some of their profits and eaten into their productivity. So that's a relatively rewarding. I think in the cybersecurity community, we do view it as a community, and people who work within it, they have a vested interest in educating people for the better good, right? So part of that is not just professionally going in and talking, but educating your friends and your family and how it affects people in their personal lives and other things they can do as well. So that's quite satisfying if you've helped somebody who really has no knowledge or no understanding, just to put some basic defenses in place to reduce the chance of something bad happening to them.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Neil?
Yeah, similar thing, but when you kick a bad guy out, right? So if we're involved in an incident or any kind of engagement and we come across the bad guy, and that could be in a sense of there's an account, there's something that they're going to use to come back in next Tuesday, right? And you manage to boot them out, or you find what they've been doing. You go in the attic and you see that bed. So you throw the bed out the window and then you put extra bolts on the door and you go, you're not getting back in. So kind of a sense of, oh yeah, we found where they got in, or we found where they were, and we can kick them out, and we're going to try and keep them out. A bit of a battle, really, but where you're successful. Or the other side, a bit more self-indulgent, is when we do an engagement where we're, like a red teaming exercise where we're pretending to be the bad guys, but with a good guy hat on, and we actually are successful. So we fish the CEO, or we get access to their data. Because at that point, though, even though we've been successful, and a lot of companies would say, oh, but we don't want you to be successful. It's a pat on our own backs, to be honest. But what it means is we found the route in, and then when we present that report or that information to the board and to the IT and the team, they're going to listen to us, because when we're sat there with their keys to the kingdom, or the CEO has clicked the phishing email that we sent, people are going to take notice. So it's that one's more of a self-indulgent bit of success for ourselves, but it does present a picture to them that, look, this could have happened and it could have been a bad guy. So yeah, both of the above. Yeah, kicking somebody out or being the bad guy for a week ourselves and doing well.
Cool. Thank you, Neil. I mean, that sounds like the way to get the budget to build those walls as well. I mean, get right penetration testing, getting the keys to the castle, and then you'll have your budget. All right, exactly, thank you guys. Thank you guys for this talk. It's been super interesting.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
All right.